Hey, what's up guys? My name is Sal, and this is another expedition log. This episode strives to uncover the impetus for the mass mall development movement in the 1950s and 1960s, and to find out what was happening in the world to bring these indoor utopias to the public. I'll set the stage with a short discussion on what was happening around the world in the 1950s, and then how Victor Gruen ushered in the modern era of enclosed shopping malls, and then we'll get to the video tour. Along with a tautology on the history of the center at Glen Burnie, we'll also be looking at the history of Toys R Us. So this episode will be a slow burn, but a satisfying one. As always, I hope you're all well, as we've just had one of the toughest weeks in the history of the United States, with the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic and countrywide protests demanding justice for the late George Floyd. Please be kind to each other and treat your fellow human beings with respect. So today, grab some drinks and get a snack, and come take a walk with me through the center at Glen Burnie and Toys R Us. But first, a word from our sponsor, a kung fu triumph from 1977 whose lead villain gave Quentin Tarantino the inspiration for Pai Mei with the long white eyebrows from Kill Bill Volume 2. I give you the invincible armor. Enjoy.
Let's drink. To the Mings. Drink up.
Out to the courtyard and let us practice.
Of course.
I must have misjudged that one. Come on.
Mr. Luke.
Take this man.
Sir! General Way, you're wrong. I've been convicted for killing a man, and I should die. Help me to capture Ho Lung, and to avenge my master.
It's clear that General Chow murdered Mr. Liu.
Damn you.
You bastard!
Well, I suppose I am. But now nobody can know where my weak spot is.
It's the head, temple, throat, armpits, groin.
Right. Just you try it.
Charles Philip Lazarus, born October 4th, 1923, served in World War II as an army cryptographer. Lazarus returned home to sell cribs and cradles from his father's bike shop in the Adams Morgan neighborhood of Washington, D.C. He then opened a children's supermart in 1948 in the old bike shop, which began operating under the Bargaintown USA brand. This building now operates as the Madam's Organ Blues Bar, which is a great place, and you should go pay to visit if you're in that neck of the woods. But it was around this time that the Cold War was beginning to heat up, with the Soviet Union making their move to gather nations in the East, working to become a superpower. Joseph Stalin and his communist regime may not have been inciting massive worldwide spanning conflict, but there were many local firefights, hence the name Cold War. 33rd US President Harry S. Truman thought it was time to intervene, and did so by introducing the Truman Doctrine in 1947, which was a foreign policy meant to provide aid to struggling nations who were being oppressed by Stalin and the power of the Soviet Union, therefore setting the stage for the Cold War. However, moving through the early 50s, it was an incredibly tense time in the world, as the threat of nuclear war was beginning to look very real. Kids were constantly in fear of seeing the Flash and having to duck under their desk or against a wall or whatever could shield them from a blast and radiation burns. With nuclear tests happening all too often, albeit in a classified setting, the public knew exactly what was happening in the deserts and at sea, and it gave civilians a look at a grim dystopia that may very well come true and made children nervous to go outside, let alone walking to school every day and gaining focus in their studies. The stage was set for mass unrest, and people were living in fear, surrounded by the threat of nuclear holocaust. Across classrooms in the 1950s in the United States, children were often shown almost propaganda-like films such as Bert the Turtle, which employed scare tactics meant to teach them the correct way to take cover and seek shelter if a nuclear bomb, or the atom bomb as it was referred to, would be dropped by adversaries on US soil, of which many examples were shown in said films. Kids had very little focus in the 1950s, which isn't surprising, and their minds were constantly daydreaming of a better world, often taking solace in comic books, with their imaginations acting as their therapy dog through the troubling times. While the threat of nuclear war was constantly on the minds of the American people, a new utopia was imminent, where people of all walks could go to get away from the worry and to spend time in an air-conditioned, forested wonderland of shopping and entertainment. Enter Victor Gruen, émigré from Vienna, Austria. He came to the United States with, quote, an architect's degree, $8, and no English, close quote. Gruen became known for designing amazing storefronts in downtown areas and entrance canopies for stores like Grayson's. But his passion project was to build outdoor social complexes like the ones he grew up with in Austria. However, he shifted his focus due to the massive unrest that the Cold War was causing to the nation, and he decided to make indoor oases to give the public shelter, comfort, and hope. So plans were set forth in 1952 for a new shopping complex, and construction would continue until October 8, 1956, when the first climate-controlled, enclosed shopping center opened in the United States. The Southdale Center had its grand opening in Edina, Minnesota, as a utopia for locals to get away and escape the worry of the Cold War, while also continuing to celebrate the success of World War II with a sense of post-war/mid-war consumerism. Victor Gruen was an absolute boss, and he ushered in the era of the enclosed shopping center with Southdale. 1 year later, Charles Lazarus would rebrand his children's Supermart Bargaintown USA branded stores to Toys R Us at the Children's Bargaintown with backward R's meant to look like a kid designed it. Lazarus would join developers like Gruen in accelerated depreciation incentives brought by reformed tax laws in the 1950s, and he started expanding the chain. He opened the very first Toys R Us in Rockville, Maryland in 1957, with many more to follow in the coming years, all of various designs. More developers were beginning to construct new shopping outlets across the country while enjoying the massive tax breaks of the reformed tax laws in the 50s. Due to the new federal tax laws, many developers were jumping on the new development bandwagon rather than renovating old structures. It was at this time that the Fed removed the standard line tax breaks for new developments and gave a rapid amortization schedule which would allow incredibly high tax breaks to be pulled from young buildings, rather than a standard line tax break which ramped up over time. This was a major factor in the massive amount of malls developed between the 1950s and 70s. Famed developer Jim Rouse would join the movement in the late 50s, bringing the first enclosed shopping center east of the Mississippi River. He began construction on the new structure, of which he was the first to use the term mall. And on October 1st, 1958, the Harrendale Mall was opened, serving as the first enclosed mall on the east coast of the US. The floodgates were opening for mall developers, and it wasn't long after Harrendale's opening that Eddie DeBartolo would climb aboard the movement. In the early 1960s, DeBartolo had announced a new enclosed mall just 3 miles up the road from Harrendale to be called the Glen Burnie Mall. It would encompass nearly 42 acres of land, with a Montgomery ward serving as the senior anchor, and was intended to complement the Harrendale Mall as a secondary mall to the local populace. After just 1 year of construction, the Glen Burnie Mall, which we're looking at right now, opened in late 1963 with Montgomery ward serving as senior anchor and a cinema at the other end of the corridor. 1 year later, a G.C. Murphy 5 and Dime opened as the second anchor space across from the wards, with a grand opening on January 30th, 1964. The mall would serve the community through the 1960s, gaining a Tops Discount City as a third anchor space, which held its grand opening and ribbon-cutting ceremony on March 17, 1969. That Tops was situated directly to the right of your screen. It was at this point that the stories of the Glen Burnie Mall and Toys R Us converge, coalescing into a linear story. Right now, we're inside the space that Tops used to reside in. But as you can see, it's a Toys R Us amidst liquidation. More on that later. Tops was acquired by the Interstate department store chain in 1960 for $4 million. And by 1966, Charles Lazarus had 4 Toys R Us at the Children's Bargain Town stores with over $12 million in yearly sales. And perhaps anticipating that his store might have plateaued, he sold the 4 stores to Interstate for $7.5 million. Interstate had also acquired the Children's Bargain Town chain as a whole 2 years later in 1969. Lazarus would remain the CEO of his chain and would still hold executive and creative control over the Toys R Us name. But in the 1970s, Lazarus's Toys R Us would blossom, and he would change the name of the giraffe used to market Children's Bargain Town from Dr. G. Raff to the more easily identifiable and kid-friendly Jeffrey the Giraffe. The mascot would begin to appear in 1973 commercials, alongside expanded company branding. However, most of the brands under the Interstate Stores Incorporated umbrella were failing through the 1970s, except for Toys R Us. Interstate filed for bankruptcy in 1974. But after citing the incredible growth of their Toys R Us stores to the bankruptcy courts, Charles Lazarus became the new head of Interstate. And in 1978, the company emerged from bankruptcy and Lazarus renamed Interstate Stores Inc. to Toys R Us, which would go on to expand at nearly 20% year over year, knocking out most family-run toy stores in the process. Way to go, Jeffrey the Giraffe.
Hi there, friends. It's Jeffrey. When you come to Toys R Us, you can meet me, along with Gigi and little baby G. And wait till you hear who else you can see.
You'll meet the amazing Spider-Man at Toys R Us. The Incredible Hulk will be there too. You'll see that beautiful crime fighter Wonder Woman, the dynamic duo of Batman and Robin, and cute little Jeffrey Jr. too.
The local newspapers will have time and place. Toys R Us.
The Glen Burnie Mall used to look much different than it does in this footage. It used to have lamps along the corridor and many, many more trees, with more classically designed store entrances rather than the square and bland entrances that you see here. Yes, we are going to go into the center concourse, despite it being drywalled off. I have a time travel machine. On October 24th, 1981, a fire broke out in the courtyard opposite of where we are right now, destroying the north courtyard and most of the ward's corridor. DeBartolo spent $3 million renovating the mall over the course of 1 year, and would also split the Toys R Us in half, leasing the other half to Baltimore-based Epstein's department store. But this would only be the first of multiple renovations, as I'll discuss a bit later. As you can probably tell from all the signage, this store only had 5 days left until it was closed for good. And I was here with Fritz, who just walked past me, and we're going to take a look through the entire store. But it was so depressing here. All the fixtures were for sale, and as you headed towards the back of the store, there was no product left. So the store was picked apart by people taking advantage of the liquidation. However, I did get back into all of the employee areas and the loading dock, which was pretty cool. So make sure you stay tuned for that. After Toys R Us went public in 1978, the chain would quickly rise to the ranks of some of America's greatest performing companies. In a late 1970s Washington Post article, it explained how, quote, like McDonald's, with its regimented service and standardized burgers and fries, Toys R Us has become an American institution, close quote. Furthermore, Toys R Us would make use of sophisticated computer systems, for the time that they were used in, to better serve their customers. And then in the early 1980s, Toys R Us would debut the tune stuck in most of our heads till this very day. You know the tune. I don't want to grow up, I'm a Toys R Us kid. That jingle made its television premiere in the early 1980s, co-created by Linda Kaplan, who at the time was a junior copywriter of the J. Walter Thompson ad agency, and author James Patterson, who went on to write revered crime novels, such as Along Came a Spider and Kiss the Girls. A 1985 Wall Street Journal article went on to say, quote, "One thing that sets the Toys R Us operation apart is that Mr. Lazarus knows precisely what his customers are buying. Each product is tracked by a computer, and that helps the chain spot hot-selling items weeks before the competitors do." Close quote. These same computer systems were used at the offshoot Kids R Us, which began in 1983 in Paramus, New Jersey, which was a discount children's clothing retail chain under the Toys R Us umbrella. To cater to a wider demographic and a larger age group of children, Lazarus would keep baby products stocked at Toys R Us, with items ranging from cribs, diapers, and baby formula. This expanded catalog would give customers a reason to visit the store year-round, as the biggest sales would occur during the holiday seasons, and they wanted continued organic growth. As long as parents got their children in those stores, they would typically leave the store with something. Parents knew when they walked into a Toys R Us, they were going to be spending money. No two ways about it. All of the displays in Toys R Us were immersive and plentiful, and towards the end of the 1980s, video games were burgeoning as a hot commodity. Nintendo games were able to be purchased by grabbing a paper slip out of one of those little plastic holsters that used to line the video game walls, and you took that slip to a cage where an employee would be stationed inside. I have so many fond memories of carefully picking out a slip on the wall and Mom taking me to the cage to buy the game. I also remember being super bummed out when I went to those little plastic holsters and I found that there were no slips left, which always meant that the games were out of stock. I remember that stuff like it happened yesterday. By 1987, Charles Lazarus was the country's best paid executive, earning more than $60 million that year, according to Forbes magazine. In an earlier interview with Forbes, he said, quote, "If you're going to be a success in life, you have to want it. I wanted it. I was poor. I wanted to be rich." Close quote. Into the 1990s, Toys R Us was still the masthead of toy retailers, dominating the market. But then in 1994, Charles Lazarus would step down in his day-to-day operations as CEO of Toys R Us. Following Lazarus's choice to step down as CEO, in April of 1996, the first Babies R Us opened in Westbury, New York, and was meant to separate sales of baby products from Toys R Us locations and Babies R Us locations. Toys R Us bought out a company called Baby Superstore in February of 1997 and all of their 78 stores in a deal totaling $376 million. And each of those stores were converted into standalone Babies R Us. However, just 1 year after that acquisition, Charles Lazarus stepped down as chairman of the board in 1998, at which point he severed his ties with the company entirely. It was at this moment that my spidey senses started tingling, sensing that I was about to be kicked out.
You're done. See ya.
I don't think that guy was ever a Toys R Us kid, but at least I got to watch the doors close for good one last time.
Great toys for less money. I realize this dream. It's my low price guarantee.
that if you can find a toy advertised at a lower price, anywhere, anytime, we'll match it. I'll guarantee it. Or my name isn't Charles Lazarus.
Hi, Ben.
Hi, Uncle Charles.
Well, he's right about one thing. We do guarantee our low prices.
Toys R Us will match any advertised price, guaranteed.
Serving as the neighbor to the Glen Burnie Mall Toys R Us, the Epstein's department store would shutter in January of 1991. G.C. Murphy would follow suit a few years later. However, a Best Buy would enter the Epstein space on November 18, 1994. The following year, a Dick's Sporting Goods was built after the shuttered G.C. Murphy building was razed. And then in 1994, the great DeBartolo-Simon IPO war began. DeBartolo wanted to go public. Simon wanted to go public. But the markets couldn't absorb that sort of massive equity. So like a true mobbed-up gentleman, DeBartolo let Simon go first, and Simon went public in 1994. Then in 1995, amidst an ongoing renovation, Dick's entered the Glen Burnie Mall. During this renovation, DeBartolo brought new lamps and facades to the mall with some general upkeep. Then, just 1 year later, after coexisting in capital markets, in 1996, Melvin and Herbert Simon would merge with the DeBartolo Realty Group, and therefore acquire the Glen Burnie Mall. Welcome to 2017. The footage you're seeing right now is what I captured with my Canon 70D when I visited back in 2017 for the very first time. At this time, the mall was open, Toys R Us was open, the center concourse was open, and it was completely accessible to the public. And I figured it would be a nice addition to show you guys what this place used to look like, rather than just showing you that ugly drywall that they put up to hide the center concourse from you. Because I really, really don't like when mall management puts up drywall. What's the purpose? Just let us see it. Let us walk around in it. Let us enjoy it. Let us experience the place for what it really is. Because we know you're going to close it eventually. So you may as well just give us some time with it before you shutter for good. As the Glen Burnie Mall straddled the new millennium, Montgomery Ward wouldn't survive in the new modern age, shuttering their presence at the mall in March of 2001. The wards used to be directly to the right of where we are right now, pre-redevelopment. This is also where the fire broke out in the early 80s. 1 year after wards closed, Simon was looking to unload a few of its non-core properties, of which, unfortunately, the Glen Burnie Mall was party to.
What made you come here?
Found that it's dead.
Oh,
Everything
that's
was
the type of stuff you like?
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, it's not cool, but
I know what you're saying.
there's an epidemic of retail deadness.
I know.
And we're looking at it.
On the mall, they need to pick it up, like have some more interesting stuff going on in here, you feel me?
So Petrie Ross Ventures, who were based out of Annapolis, Maryland, seized on the opportunity. They bought the mall in August of 2002 after negotiating with Simon for over 18 months. The deal finally closed for $20 million. They promptly announced a redevelopment project to take place about 1 year later. The project entailed demolishing the abandoned A&P outparcel grocery store and the abandoned wards. A Target would open first in place of the A&P in October 2004, followed by the grand rededication of the newly renovated interior of the mall, now known as the Center at Glen Burnie, in the summer of 2005, along with 13 new inline tenants that replaced the former ward's space, bringing the mall to a total of 428,000 square feet of gross leasable area and 46 tenant stalls, with many which were now outward-facing. While Petrie Ventures were celebrating a grand reopening at the Center at Glen Burnie, Toys R Us were wading murky waters without the leadership of Charles Lazarus. After an awful experiment where Toys R Us wanted to sell toys through Amazon.com, this experiment ended with the website wanting nearly $50 million a year in commission fees from Toys R Us so that they can sell their toys on the Amazon platform. After a heated lawsuit, Amazon and Toys R Us settled the dispute in court and parted ways. Partially as a result of this lawsuit, the entire Toys R Us company was taken private by a group of equity firms in 2005 when Bain Capital, Kohlberg, Kravis, Roberts & Company, along with Vornado Realty Trust, bought the entire company of Toys R Us for $6.6 billion. Best Buy would exit the Center at Glen Burnie in January of 2010, relocating literally across the street on the other side of Ritchie Highway, opening later that same month. The vacant Best Buy space would be divided between an H.H. Gregg, who rivaled Best Buy, and an Office Depot. H.H. Gregg came in on May 6, 2010, and Office Depot came a little bit later, on November 10th in that same year. When I first filmed this mall, back in 2017, I had no idea what I was doing. I was walking around this place with my Canon DSLR, and I had a big boom mic on it. And while the footage is subpar, given the standards and camera technology today, I couldn't be happier that I have it. And from when I first saw this place and heard of the redevelopments, I had always wanted to do an entire story of this property's birth, life, and death, which I'm able to bring you today.
Definitely is dead. I ain't gonna smile because it's dead.
Right now, we're entering Dick's. This is the abandoned anchor space that hasn't seen light in about 7 years. And when I was there, the roof was making tons of noise, and it sounded like somebody was constantly walking right above my head, following every step that I took. And the floor was also pretty noisy. There were a lot of bubbles in it, which reminded me of the food court at Forest Fair. There was also a lot of hornets at the front door, and it was super sketchy in there, to say the least. And it was very easily accessible. The door was just wide open. So I'm positive I wasn't alone in there. But at least I got one last look at the concourse that had been sealed up for years. This was actually the same day that I did the live stream when I was here with Brand Muffin, one of my good friends. Make sure you go follow him on Instagram. He's a great guy. But that was the same day when I was going back and forth between here and Arundel Mills just so I can buy a flashlight so I could film this place for you guys. That was a really fun day. But after taking a look in here, I figured it was time to leave Dick's alone and venture forth. The center at Glen Burnie would enter receivership after Petrie Ross was at risk in defaulting on their loan and was put in the hands of LNR Partners in late 2012. However, during the receivership, Greenwich, Connecticut-based Starwood Property Trust purchased the entire LNR Partners LLC catalog for $1.05 billion, and in turn, they acquired the center at Glen Burnie. This deal closed on April 22nd, 2013. By 2015, Toys R Us had closed its famous Times Square megastore in New York, marking the beginning of the end for the company. And by the end of the holiday season in 2017, the company reported abysmal sales amidst an ever-growing climate of online specialty shops and brick-and-mortar stores which offered catered online pickup, delivery, and special orders. H.H. Gregg also suffered from terrible sales in 2017 and shuttered their center at Glen Burnie location in late 2017. On September 18, 2017, Toys R Us filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. And by March of 2018, they announced that all US and British stores would be closing. Then on March 22, 2018, just one day before Toys R Us began liquidation sales, Charles Lazarus passed away at the age of 94. By April, all British stores were closed. And by May, the entire company had run out of cash. And then all US-based Toys R Us locations were shuttered by June. I came back a few months later with my best friend Fritz, right after we went to the Marley Station Mall. When I entered the center at Glen Burnie, I really wasn't surprised to find hundreds of dead, dry leaves on the floor, because I figured they really weren't maintaining the property anymore. But I was surprised to see an Ollie's discount chain that had already gotten fully moved into the former Toys R Us space, not even bothering to remove the colored tiles on the facade. It was this moment that struck me right in the childhood feels, shoving the fact in my face that the Toys R Us chain was gone, and today, toys were us, and that it was finally time for the world to grow up.
I'm a Toys R Us kid.
They got the best for so much less.
You'll really flip your lid.
From bikes to trains to video games.
It's the biggest toy store there is. Gee whiz!
I don't want to grow up, 'cause baby, if I did,
I couldn't be a Toys R Us kid. Once a Toys R Us kid?
always a Toys R Us kid.
As I mentioned all the way back in 2017 in ExLog 6, when I was but a wee lad, in way over my head in research, handwriting the script for every episode on a super tiny notebook called the Expedition Log, writing with a fountain pen that had a nib far too broad for the paper. It was at this time that I informed you all that a demolition project would begin at the center at Glen Burnie to redevelop it into an open-air shopping center with work to be completed by sometime in 2018. Now, I've made this claim in countless other ExLogs, only to wait years to never see the developer come through with their project. The mall would just sit there, vacant, abandoned, and rotting. I'm looking at you, Burlington Center. I'm looking at you, Century 3. I'm looking at you, Landmark. But in this case, we can clearly see that they had every intention on tearing down that quaint little Cold War-era gray ghost. As I walked through here in this footage, my initial thoughts and gut reaction were to be angry that they couldn't save this place. I was furious to see the concrete bricks sectioning off the former center concourse, with only a peek through to the other side now. But after boarding up the concourse for years, not allowing any mall walkers in, I'd rather see it demolished than sitting sealed up. But even to this day, as you'll hear in a bit, you can still visit this place and you can still see a few trees and hear the buzz of those lights above your head. And I'll keep visiting this place as long as I can. But I wanted to make good on my promise to bring the entire story to you guys on this place, as I've been talking about this episode for years. By the way, if you've gotten this far in the episode, you're a true Quite Studios explorer, and your viewership means the world to me. While I do appreciate the elite explorers with my entire heart who contribute to me directly through Patreon and on this channel, it's all about making content that you guys like. And if you're still with me, right now, you absolutely rock. Go join the Discord server, and I'll give you a special role to commemorate your view. A link for the Discord server and all of my other social media are down below. Thanks, guys. Hey, what's up, guys? We're here on the site of the former center at Glen Burnie, or the Glen Burnie Mall. And it's been closed for some time, and then they sealed off the center concourse, and then the Toys R Us closed, and it was turned into an Ollie's, and they've been actively demolishing this place for quite some time. But I wanted to show you what's left of the Glen Burnie Mall, or the center at Glen Burnie. So come on, come take a walk with me. As we take a walk through this Soviet bunker-looking scaffolding into what used to be the center at Glen Burnie, I want you guys to pour one out for this mall. And join me in thanking Charles Lazarus for his creation, because today, toys were us. Toys were us for years, and for many of us, that store was the foundation of our childhood. And we can thank Toys R Us for filling those years with things that fueled our imagination and sparked our childhood wonder. Even to this day, with that all too familiar Toys R Us facade, bastardized by an Ollie's logo and signage, that rainbow tile makes me think of a simpler time. A time without hate and turmoil. A time without emotions fueled by the actions or inactions of others. We all need to remind ourselves to occasionally revisit that time and remember what it used to feel like to just treat each other as friends, without harboring any judgment or feelings aside from those of curiosity and unbiased camaraderie. We owe it to ourselves to revisit that simple time on occasion so that we remember what it's like to not hate. Because hate breeds violence. And there's just too much trouble in the world today. And we owe it to each other to try and bring back simpler times. So the next time you're looking at somebody and you're judging them for something that they have no control over, just remind yourself that they're a human being, just like you, just like all of us. And that we just need to treat each other with respect and civility, because we're all in this together. So do us all a favor, and just be kind.
When a mall is demolished, and when a mall is demalled, or when it is stripped of its former aesthetic value, and turned into like a strip mall or something like that, there's usually nothing left to tell you what it used to be. Right now I'm inside what used to be the center at Glen Burnie. And I did ExLog number 6 on this mall back in December of 2017. However, if you know where to look, you can still see traces of what used to be the center at Glen Burnie. So right behind me is the biggest trace of this mall's past. Obviously the awning that says the center at Glen Burnie is the biggest giveaway of what this place used to be down, because the one in the back has been torn down. So the center at Glen Burnie is no more. And it's hot. And there's just nothing left here. And they boarded up the section to the place that the Concourse used to be. So now when you go inside to the Ollie's, it's just depressing. So not only is it depressing looking at where the awning used to be, but now you have this like Soviet looking bunker awning thing that you have to walk through if you want to go into the Ollie's. Sadly, this is the fate of a mall that has failed. And it's pretty sad because this place had some amazing charm. And I'll always remember everything about this place, but if nobody documents these places, then how do we know what they used to look like? You know, like people forget about them. People forget what these places looked like. They forget what they smelled like. They forget what it sounded like, the reverberations of the mall. And it's sad, they just die like a whisper in the wind. And this place is just gone. I mean, there's nothing left. It's not the center at Glen Burnie anymore.
I'd like to thank all of you for watching. My platform and voice may be rather insignificant in the grand scheme of things right now, but if you were intending on becoming my patron, or if you were thinking of donating money to me, I'd kindly ask that instead you please give to a charity that either supports the Black Lives Matter movement or the COVID-19 Response Fund, preferably both, because those are what we need to move forward together as a society right now. The only way forward is through, and it's through together. We all have to be in this together, and we cannot be against each other. Please also make sure to follow all of my social media, of which the links are down in the description below. Make sure to also follow all of my friends on the DMod Seal, and to come and join the Discord. Stay safe out there, everybody. Please. Stay home if you can. Take care of yourselves, and have a fantastic day.
Definitely is dead. I ain't gonna smile because it's dead.